Again, welcome everyone to the July Focus Friday session. I'm here with Renee, and hopefully we're going to show you some things that you can use in your everyday usage of Focus and WebFOCUS. On the screen, I have the housekeeping. The session is being recorded. If you have any questions, we have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I believe it might be under the More option. If not, if you can't find it, you can put it in the chat. And we hopefully will get to any questions you have. We like to have the interaction going back and forth between what we're showing and what you need to know. So don't be shy. And most of the time you guys aren't. Presentations will be emailed along with a link to the recording early next week. So if you miss something or you want to go back and refer, you'll have all the information beginning of next week. All right. I think that takes care of that. Other than Summit. Summit is next month. As such, there will be no August Focus Friday, but hopefully we can see you at the in-person Summit. All right. Don't disconnect. All right, let me do this. There we go. All right, let's kick it off. Renee, you want to say anything before I start?
No. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to start off talking about the synonyms, and this is part 3 of the series, and we're going to talk about fields. So it's just like the other sections, there's a lot that we can put in a synonym about fields. So we're only covering a subset of that. So what we've talked about so far is the file level. Then last time we talked about segments. And this time we're going to talk about fields. All right, so at the field level, you have your typical needed information, field name, alias, and format and usage. Now, you may or may not have an actual. If you're describing a focused data source, you will not have an actual or you don't need one. The format and usage, the actual storage of the data will all be determined for you for those files. You can identify if a field is an index. What happens if there is no data for this field? If it's missing, do you want it to be treated as something that's not really there? So if you're doing averages, that value, that missing value will not count into the average and kind of mess up the averaging of that value. You have descriptions, you have description LN, so you can put the description in different languages, title, and also title LN, and then message. We have groups, which describes multiple fields in a single entity. For those of you who may happen to know COBOL, which are very few of us nowadays, it would kind of be like an O1 level and then an O2 level describing the O1 level. So you're just redefining a set of fields into one long field. Elements goes with that, and we'll get into that later. We're going to talk about an accept list. So if you want to validate your data, you can do so with an accept. Accept is also used with rec type. So if you're looking for a particular record, let's say a record type B, then your accept will then say, I want record type. The accept value will be the B for you want record type B. Again, we'll get into all this later. Order is an internal counter for the occurs segment. Last time we talked about segments, and we can have an occurs equal. Well, if you have an occurs equal 5, which means you have 5 different occurrences of that segment, you can put an order field in the segment. Now, the order field doesn't physically exist. It's virtual. But what it does is it gives you a subscripting mechanism. So I can say, I want to get this field where order is 1, where order is 2, where order is 3. So you can pick out just one value of that occurring, or one occurrence of the occurring segment. Def cent is your default century. So normally you can set it at the system level. you can also set it at the field level. So if you want to change the def cent and year thresh, you can change them directly on the field. You can put define to the master in a synonym, and you can put computes, and then you can put filters. And it just goes on and on. Rec type identifies the type of record in a non-focused data source. So if you have, let's say, VSAM, or you have just a fixed record format, you can go ahead and use record type on that. Property, we're going to talk about property in the use with FML hierarchy. So you have what the property of the field is, and then you have the reference. So what field is it referencing? We'll get into that a little later. And geographic role is there. There's a lot that is in geographic role, but what it does is it tries to determine, based on the information and field names, if this can be used in some sort of GIS lookup. Excuse me. All right, so let's get into the heart of it. So you have to have field name, which is the name of the data field. You can have field as a shortened name or field name for the full name. Sorry. The maximum length of a field name is 512 characters, except if you have a focus index where you're limited to 12 characters. If you have a cross-reference in a join that you're using, that also has to be 12 characters, because most likely in the cross-reference, it's going to be the index field. Duplicate names are allowed. So if you have multiple segments, you can have duplicate names within the segments, and technically you can have duplicate names within the same segment. But the problem is, which one are you going to get if you reference that name? So generally, you'll get the first field that's found. So in a field, if you have multiple fields with the same name, the first one that the system sees is the one that you're going to use. You can qualify the field names. Which I thought I had an example. So you could have segment name.field name, so you know specifically which segment that field is coming from. If you have a real field with the same name as another real field, the first one is the one you're going to get, first one we see. But if you have a virtual field and also that has the same name as a real field, you're going to get the last virtual field that gets retrieved. So we're going to read the real field, but then the virtual field is going to overlay the value. Virtual field versus an external virtual field. In this case, you're going to get the last external virtual field retrieved. So if you're doing real to real, you're going to get the first, but when you're dealing with virtual fields, you're going to get the last value. Format is the usage characteristics of the field. How do I want to use it? How do I want it to display? So I might have an input field that only has 5 characters, but I want to display it as 10. Now there's going to be some blank padding because of that, but you have the ability of doing it. So your data type for alpha, you have alpha, your A and your A and Vs. Hexadecimal is a format U. We have a new string format, which would have a /string for the format. So the string format is basically, it's an undefined number of characters. Text is TX. Your numerics are your integer, floating, double precision, packed, zone decimal. The M is double precision decimal, but it's stored differently. It's stored as a base 10 number, so it helps avoid a lot of rounding issues. And then X is basically the M, but you get twice the precision. You got your dates, and then you have your date times. If you don't specify a format for a field, the default is the 12.2. So the actual is for your non-focused data sources. So for an actual, you can have a date, and the date would be an integer 4, and it would be a date offset, which is how smart dates are stored. You can have an A and N, so you specify how many characters comprise this field. So country is an A10. So if I put it to a hold file, you might see A10. A lot of times, though, if you're just doing a generic hold file, you might see the country stored as an A12, but used with a usage of A10. Now, why would that happen? When Focus stores your output as alpha, it does a rounding up to a full word boundary. So 4 bytes make a word. So since you have 10 character or 10 bytes, we're going to round it up to 12 to get the full word. If you do format alpha, you don't have to worry about that. Whatever you ask for is what you're going to get. So country then would be an A10. A and W is used when you have an A and V field and you put it to an alpha hold file. And the difference between an A and W actual and an A and V actual is the A and V has 2 bytes for the length preceding the value, and the A and W has 6 bytes for the length. You have integer, double precision. So internally, double precision is stored as 8 bytes, and floating is stored as 4. So that's why we have the D8 and the F4. H is for timestamps. M, X, P, and Z. Those are all other numeric formats. So if you have any questions for any of these, feel free to put them in the chat or the QA, and we can go over them a little further if you want. We mentioned property and reference in relation to hierarchy. So in FML processing, that's where this is used mostly. So here I have the sent.gl file. It's a focus file. And we have one segment accounts. And inside of accounts, we have a field called GL account. And that GL account is the account name. So what we have, let's say 1,000, 1,100, 1,101. You might have some 2,000s. So if you're following your normal counting numbering system, your 100s, your account starting with 1 would be assets, 2 would be liabilities, and along those lines. But basically, everything is going to roll up. So if you roll up all of the values starting with a 1, you're going to get all of your assets. In this case, the field type is I because of the roll-up capabilities. And now we have the parent. So every account rolls up to a parent. So in the master, we have field name equals GL account parent. We have an alias, and the format is A7. But now we want to tell it that it's the parent of the GL account. So we give it the property of parent of, and it's a parent of the reference GL account. So that's how you establish the relationship. We have a GL account type, a roll-up operations. We have a GL account level. We have a GL account caption. Now the caption is going to be, when you do your reporting, what value do I want to see in the report? So this would be the account name. So this time we're going to say the property is caption, and it's also referencing the GL account. So it's going to be the caption or the account name for the GL account. Then we have system account and the alias. All right. So now if I do an FML report, table file sent.gl, print GL account parent for GL account. So the 4 is based on the child level. And it's saying, I want 1,000. So I want all accounts that have 1,000 with their children. So any subset. So it's going to kind of iteratively go through and see which accounts now have 1,000 as the parent. And I know 1,100 is one. And then it's going to say, well, does 1,100 have any children? And it's going to keep going down. So the command 1000 with children 2 says go down 2 levels. I could have more, but we're only going to go down 2. And then we say as caption to get the actual account name at that point. So when we run this, we see profit before tax, gross margin, which is the caption, is account 1000. Underneath it, we have sales revenue 2000, cost of goods sold 2000. Total operating expenses rolls up to 1000. Under it, we have selling expenses and general and administration expenses. So without you having to specify each line in the FML report, FML takes care of it for you by doing the hierarchy. So if you add a new value, it will automatically get put in the place where it needs to be in your report, and you don't have to change the detail. Where if you could have said, I want to see profit before first, gross margin, and you specified it out yourself, then you'd have to go back and change the whole code. Here, you just add the value, you run the report, and everybody's happy. I haven't done an FML in a while, so if you guys want to see more on FML and or FML hierarchy, let me know in the evaluations, and we can do something in the future. All right, we're going to talk about combining fields in the master. So if you have 2 fields, you have last name and first name, and you want to combine them into one field called name, you could do that easily in the define. Define full name equals last name concatenated with first name. Or you could do it in the synonym as long as the fields are stored directly next to each other. So let's just jump in. So here we have group equals full name with a format of 825. And because it's a group, we're going to look at the next field, the next item, which says field name equals last name, which has a format of 810. And then we have field equals first name, which is a form, 815, and then we have the 810. Notice the 815 and the 810 add up to be the full format of the group. So that's important. So you're saying that if you specify a format at the group level, you're saying that use the same number of characters that come after to make up that format, however many fields that may be. So in this case, it was 2. You could have done 5 fields of 5 characters, as long as you get that total of 25. So that was a little confusing. So what we did is we changed that. So instead of you saying, I want to calculate and make sure I have the right values and I have my 25 digits, we made it where you can say, I want to create the grouping based on elements. And then you would say elements equals 2. And you say this group is combined of the next 2 elements. So in this case, it would be the next 2 fields, which would be last name and first name. So here's an example using elements, and it also has multiple groups. So it's nesting the groups. So here we have segment equals XYZ, group equals group 1. Group 1 contains 2 elements. Now, the sticky thing about this is a group element counts a group, the whole group, as 1 element. So in this case, group 2 has 2 elements, so it's easy to see that group 2 is comprised of field A and field B. But group 1, because it's comprised of 2 elements, it's going to be comprised of group 2 and field C. So it's a little difficult concept to grasp, but once you understand it, and I tried to indent the fields in the image to hopefully show that. So the 2 elements for group 1 is the group field and then the field after it. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, let's jump into rect type. For my mainframe people, if you're running vsam files, isam files, I think we have C isam files if you were running on Unixes, or fixed files. Everybody uses fixed files. You might have a set of data where you have different record types. You may have a header record, a couple detail records, maybe some more detail records that have different details in them. This is where rec type would come in. So let's just jump in here. I was hoping to have some data. All right. So here we have pub info, and it has a rec type of P and it has the publisher's number, the author, and a title. And then it has a child of synopsis, which has a plot line. And then it also has a child for the book info and the serial number. So the serial information is a child of the book info. So in this case, we have different rec types starting at the pub info, which is the parent. We go out to plot line, which would be another one. But physically in the file, these are each individual records. So in this case, we're going to say we have our segment name of pub info, which is the main segment. We're looking for a rec type of an alias of P. In this case, the alias is the value that we're looking for in that field. And that field is an A1. So every time I see a P, we're going to then we're going to interpret that line as the pub no author title synopsis. I missed the segment there. So pub no author and title. If I get a record type of B, then I know that record then is defined as binding price and serial number. So most likely this is going to be a variable record input file because all of the lines probably aren't going to add up to the same. And then you have record S for serial. So again, the input record, you're going to have the first record is going to be P, so it's going to be P, and then the data for P, and then a B, and then the data for B, and then the S and the data for S. So this isn't used too much nowadays if you're not on the mainframe, but it still is used a lot if you are on the mainframe, especially with vSAM. All right. So here we showed the rec type. If you have a single value, you can do the alias equals and then the value. But if you had multiple values, so if you had maybe P or Q that you wanted to look for, then you can use the alias as a true alias and then add an explicit except list. So you can say except list equals list or range. So you can say A or B or C or D, or you can say A to D. You have a lot of flexibility if you do it as an except. Okay. Sometimes you have a file where none of the record types are related to each other at all. So here we have a book record, a magazine record, and a newspaper record. No relationship across any of those. But they're in the same file, and you want to be able to report. So you may do a book report, a magazine report, or a newspaper report. So you can create one synonym that reads that data, and you provide a dummy parent. So is there really a dummy parent? No, we just call it dummy because we have to have each of the non-related paths or segments going up into some parent. So here's the dummy, and then how do we do that? So the first segment is segment dummy, alias. There's no field really in that. It's just there as a main segment. then all of the segments that we're going to define will then use the dummy as its parent. Now, if you're doing reporting against this, you want to make sure that all of the fields you use in a report come from the same segment. You don't want to cross segments because, again, they're not really related. All right, so when would you use this? Some of our, we used to, this is an example of our, let's say this is a master file. And we put notes in every time a change is made via a project. And those notes go in as an asterisk. So this probably isn't even focus code because if it was truly a comment, it would be dash asterisk. So if you look at this, every line starts with an asterisk. So what you could do then is create a synonym to read this and say the rect type for the first character and have an accept value of asterisk. So then you would read only the header information and not the rest of the data or the code that might be following afterwards. This example is part of a trace. So if you look at a trace and you want to only read that A, B, C, E pop line, as long as you can identify something that's unique on the line, you can make it a rect type. So you can find, you can put a filler that goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 characters of filler. And then that should get us to the C in the CE pop. And then do a rect type that's an A5 with an accept value of CEPOP. Then if you report then against that synonym, you will only see those lines that have the CE pop. So it's acting like a filter. All right, adding styles to the master. So at the field name level, in this case, field name equals seats, alias equals seat, format equals I3, you can say use underscore style equals seats. If you do this, though, you also have to have a separate section to define that style sheet. So here I have begin style equals seats, which matches the name of the use style, and then what the styling is for that particular field that you want to use for seats. So you have begin style and then end style. So notice we have two different use styles we're using, seats and body type. So now when you do a report and you reference seats, it will automatically get the styling that you specified in the synonym. Any questions on that? And my understanding is that this can be used in Designer. So if you have it in the synonym, Designer should be picking it up. All right. Any other questions? While you guys type, if you have any, I did want to show you some of the more basic things, which isn't in this presentation. We talked about you could put defines and computes in a synonym. So what I did is I took car and I added a define in the synonym. So the syntax is define space, your define name, / format equals, just like you would put in a define. And just like in the define, you're going to end it with a semicolon. But because it's in a synonym, you then also have to end it with a comma $. So once you do this, then you can come into your report, say sum retail cost, dealer cost, profit. And when you run it, now you didn't have to do the define yourself. It was already done for you in the synonym. Compute would be exactly the same. Instead of a defined profit, you would have a compute and then your compute field name. But in order to use it in your procedure, you're going to have to say you still have to put the word compute, but then you can put the reference of the name in the synonym, not having to put the full expression. All right, any questions? And the last thing no, that's it. All right, Renee, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you. That was a great presentation, by the way, Walter, and I love the rec type. I can't help it. It's we don't see it as much, but it has a lot of capabilities, and like you pointed out, utilizing it for files you might not think of in terms of a rec type, but you can leverage it for filtering, which is great. So cool. All right, so let me share my screen. Just bear with me a moment. Should be seeing it. Look good? Walter,
Oh,
is the
good.
present?
Oh,
It's
good.
coming
Yeah.
up? Great.
I had trouble getting my mute off.
Sorry about that. Okay, thanks. Appreciate the confirmation. All right, great. So today's presentation is a little different. Normally I do demonstrations and everything. I decided to do it as a presentation. And I wanted to pick out a few topics that have come into support at different points recently that I thought would be ideal to discuss because the features have been there for quite a long time. And it's just a matter of being aware that it exists and that you can leverage it to meet your business requirements. So I picked 3 things that I thought that were of particular of use that I think that at least to be aware of it, so that if you're aware of it, certainly then you can leverage it if it comes up. So again, as I noted, this is explore solutions to recent customer inquiries. And the 3 things we're going to talk about is display syntax components, and I'll go into that in a little bit. Potentially how you can override the file extension for PC hold format DFIX. And also a big one that comes up quite a bit is what if you're in a UTF-8 environment and you have that alphanumeric padding, right? How can you avoid that for certain file creation, whole file creations? Obviously, you can't change your entire environment, and that's not a possibility, but could you potentially leverage a feature within WebFOCUS to control that alphanumeric padding? And you can. So that's what today's presentation is all about. So I hope you find it interesting. So the very first one, I love talking about this. It's come up time and time again, and it's display syntax components. So the question is, are you able to, or can you, or how to display, like, for example, request selection in the report, right? In the reporter chart of the request being run. So is that possible? Yes, of course. And the way it is done is through display syntax components. There are attributes that are available that you can actually reference in your heading and footing objects within your reporter chart as if they were field names, but they're not really field names. But they actually enable you to actually retrieve the syntax components from your request for display purposes. And the typical one, and that's why I mentioned selection, is there a way to retrieve the selection from a request and being able to display it? One thing is when you reference these, the syntax component, if it goes on a multiple line, it'll extend beyond, it'll wrap it around for the width of the chart or the report. So let's talk, you're just hearing about it. What does it actually look like? So from a syntax perspective, the components, the way you reference it in a heading or footing, you do a caret like you would for a field name, and then you say request dot. And then there's filters, which will display and list the if or where conditions that are part of that request. If you do request.verb underscore objects, it lists the display fields referenced in the request, right? Your verb objects. Makes sense. Request.sort underscore keys references all the sort fields in the request. And then we even break it down where request.by keys does the by fields, and request.across keys does the across fields. Now, for all of those, if you know printed fields, you won't see the no printed fields in the output. But the last two you will. So the second to last one is request.verb_objects_context. And that displays the command, the verb, along with the fields that are being displayed. And you will see the no printed fields there. And request.sort_keys._context is all the sort phrases, and you will see no prints there as well. Another thing to note that I didn't include on the slides is that by default, like you'll see the titles being displayed, but if your fields don't have titles, you'll see the field names in the output, usually with high-level qualifiers. So let's just take an example, and I'll build this through the designer too, but here's just the syntax so that you can see it from a code perspective for reference. And you can see I'm going against WF Retail Light, and I'm summing revenue, MSRP, gross profit, discount, cost of goods, and I'm doing it by product category. And then in the heading, I have display objects, and I'm referencing that display syntax component. I'm doing request.verb_objects to see the verb objects. And I'm doing request.sort_keys to see the sort fields. And just to see it from a designer perspective, you can see in the background, right, product category for the chart. You can see here in my legend, there's revenue, MSRP, gross profit, discount, and cost of goods. And then you can see I'm in the edit page header component, and I've coded actually the display objects there with the caret request.verb_objects and the sort fields I'm saying, and that's just display text for the caret request.sort_keys. Very easy referencing. One thing I'd say, be very careful of any kind of unprintable characters that you do when you're typing in things that could throw off the formatting and the display of the output. So let me just show you that. Now, when you do that and you save the heading or footing potentially, but usually it's in a heading. When you first come in Preview and Designer, you will see the actual caret request.verb_objects request. You'll see the display syntax components briefly, but then it should substitute. So it might be pretty brief, but now you'll see in preview how I'm seeing now the display objects. I'm seeing revenue, MSRP, gross profit, discount, and cost of goods. I'm seeing the titles for those fields because they all have titles, as well as the sort field product category, and that's its title as well. So what if I were to run this? If I run it, skip a second there, you can see there's my chart output, and you can see there is my heading for the chart, displaying those syntax components. Very useful. And again, where I stress this the most, it's probably the most useful is customers asking about, can I display the filters, the where and if clauses for my requests? And this is how you would do it. So here I'm just showing you the same thing. I right-clicked and did a run with SQL trace because it happened to be relational, and just so that you can see the SQL trace here, but obviously the chart output still has our display syntax component attributes being displayed. Very cool, in my opinion. So this slide, I wanted to showcase what if you could see that I added sales unit and sort fields as product subcategory now. And you could see that sales unit became a verb object, right? It's in the vertical bucket for the chart. And then you can see color is a product subcategory. Now you might say to yourself, well, wait a minute, product category was already in the request. And yet product subcategory, I added it afterwards, and that's now first in the sort field listing. Well, that's just because of the way the tool creates, particularly with charts. Obviously, if it were reports, you would have a rows bucket, and it will respect the order of where you put those fields in. This is a chart. Chart has specific rules, each of the different chart types. So it's how we create those field references within the graph file request, and then how we reference those objects. So just to showcase it for clarity, I'm showing you the syntax behind the scenes. And here you can see I have by field, right? So there's the product subcategory and the product category. Product category was originally first there. Yes, there's a question?
No, no questions.
No question. Okay. So I saw a raised hand. So the by fields that you can see there, right? Again, when I originally created this, I had product category, and that was the horizontal bucket. But then I added product subcategory, and that became a color in the color bucket. And you can see the by fields in the order. That's why you're seeing the sort field, the display syntax component in that order. And then if I look further down into let's give it a second. Here you can see within the graph style section, right, for the type of data, N1, which is product subcategory, that's the color bucket, and then N2, which is product category, is the x-axis. So just, again, I wanted to bring a little clarity to why you might see that. But certainly if this was a table file, how you have the fields ordered absolutely would be respected by how you would put them in. So again, just a little thing to be aware of. So let's change it a little bit. Let's go back to the original request where I had revenue through cost of goods as my verb object. I have only in the horizontal bucket product category, and I add a filter for sale year. And now I've updated my header, my page heading, to have all of the different components for display purposes, just for demoing purposes, right? So you can see everything there. And once I do that, you'll see at the top. Now notice you're not seeing all of it, and notice I'm showing the bottom ones. And the reason why I'm doing that deliberately is you can see over to the right-hand side, I put a circle there, that it's scrollable. So you can scroll because you only see a few lines in Designer. Now, if you want to see the full thing, obviously you can re-edit the heading so you can see everything there. But I just wanted to showcase that's why you're seeing limited visibility on that.
Renee?
Yes.
So there's a question, will the request dot fields be available as selectable within Designer to drag and drop to the report?
No. That's not there. And it's really because even though they're fields, they're not fields in the sense of that you can reference them in defines or anything like that. This is something that's really strictly for like heading and footing components and attributes that you can reference. It's still a good potential new feature to see if there's a way we can automate it so that it's there for users to be aware of. But just recognize that they're not true fields in the sense of that you can leverage it and put it in a define or a compute. It's strictly a reference only for, headings and footings. Okay. So with that request, you can just see I did another run with SQL syntax. And you can see the SQL output. And at the bottom, you can see all of the objects, the syntax components that I displayed. And notice that across, because there was no across fields, it says no tokens were used in the request. If for the filters, I didn't have a filter there like I do, where it says where sale year greater than equal to 2022, it would have said no filters were used in the request. And notice that with the display command, even though I said some, it puts right out. It's a little idiosyncrasies there, but overall, a very powerful feature that can give you a lot of control. I wanted to showcase another version of this using a report. And in this case, I did it where the attributes are on separate lines from the text display. So you can kind of see that there in the page heading. And for the request itself, and I think I have that on another slide, I do product category, product subcategory model, business region, store business subregion, store country. I have an across on sale year. I do revenue, quantity sold, and then I have several filters as well. And I'll showcase that just so that you have a reference point. Just so in preview again, because of the way the heading is and the limited lines that are displayed, you can scroll. That's at the top this time for this example. And here's just showing you the syntax that's behind the scenes that was written, and you can see the heading and it's ... after to display the objects. But I wanted to showcase the buys, the verbs, the buys, the across field. And then you can see the where the store business region is North America, or the store country name is France or Germany, because those are in EMEA. So I wanted to pick those up as well. And then you can see the where also separate for the sales year for equal to 2022 in this case. So what you see is the output. Here I did HTML output where I froze the titles, and you can see all the information here. Usually you will see by default, depending on, again, your style sheet or theme that that's being picked up. You'll see the output like in a bold, but when you have filters, because it does do multiple lines, usually only the last line is bolded or enabled and everything. That's a little quirk with the styling and the way it comes out. Certainly I could do something like, I'll just showcase it here, where I made the whole heading and I said style normal. Just, again, that's a simplistic style sheet command, but just to showcase it, taking that same example, and then I just made everything so you can just see that output there without the bolding and being a little bit off. And another thing to consider is I've had customers request in the past, well, maybe I don't want to necessarily display, but I want to store that to a file. Well, something you could potentially do is run the request, like maybe with a format of like WP or something like that, and parse out, dash read, dash write out the filtering that's there and everything, and then run the request as you would for whatever purpose to meet your business requirements. But just wanted to showcase. Again, I think it's a great feature. Not enough customers are aware of it. And again, I believe the big question that we usually get from support is really, how can I display the filters from a request? And now you know, and not beyond that, you can actually showcase other components that are part of the request and use different attributes, display syntax component attributes for that purpose.
Renee?
Yes, questions?
A couple people said that they can't see your screen, so I just want to get up. If
Okay.
you can't see the screen, can you put a note in the chat, please? And I know, Gabble, you raised your hand and said you couldn't see, but then you lowered your hand, so hopefully you got it worked out. Okay, so Gabble changed the render type to WebGL2, and it's working, so hopefully that might help other people.
Okay.
All right, because some people can see and a couple can't.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry about that.
All right. Anything else? Any other questions?
No, let's see, make sure. Someone says, I'd like to use that feature and be able to show the applied filter as mouse over info in the page setup.
Okay. Definitely, I would recommend opening up a case. If it comes from a customer, I certainly can recommend it to product management that it came up. But if you open up a case, even better. And I think that would be great because, again, not enough people know that it exists, but it's been in the product and the language a long time. So leveraging it and being aware of it is the most important piece, I believe, so that you know it's there if you need to use it. Okay. Then I'll move on to my next topic of the three things that I wanted to talk about. And this is about file extension override for PC hold format DFIX. So is that even possible? Can you override a file extension for DFIX? Normally when you do it, yep.
Before you jump to the new topic, can the details in the header be shown in the footer instead?
Yes, absolutely. Page heading for heading and footing. Absolutely. Although typically it tends to be heading. So, but yes, both. Okay. So is a file extension override for PC hold format DFIX even possible? And this question came up because the customer needed it to be for PC hold, not for hold. Normally when you do PC hold with format DFIX, it gets like a BIP extension and everything when you're coming to the screen, right? So think about what is PC hold, right? Hold is an extract to a file, but PC hold, right? With WebFOCUS, you open the output in the browser or you redirect it to an application via your redirection, your MIME settings and your redirection, whether or not to save that report, do you say yes or not, and what your extension is and the appropriate application that it gets associated with, right? So I wouldn't be talking about if it wasn't possible, but you might not be aware of this, right? So there is a data set attribute. Now, while data set attribute is not explicitly mentioned on PC hold format, it's explicitly mentioned on a hold. It actually does work and is supported. Even though it's not formally in the documentation for a hold, but it does achieve the results. So with a data set attribute, it allows us to override whatever the default format is. Usually it's a .fmt, but if you go on PC hold for DFIX, it would be, like a bit, you'll see that in a minute. So what it allows us to do is we can say data set and our file name .extension. So I did like my dfile.csv there, or dataset mydfile.txt. And whatever extension is, obviously I would have mine for that extension, pointing to appropriate application so that could be opened, right? So this is how this attribute is available to be utilized. So let's go back and go through DFIX and what it is, just in case you're not aware of it. So format DFIX, just a review for format purposes. It's an on table. You can do a hold or PC hold, right? As file name. If you don't have as file name, hold is the default. Format DFIX, right? Instead of like com or comt. Delimiter is the one required attribute that you must indicate. So what is the delimiter? And I give you the details down here below, right? Delimiter can be up to 30 printable and non-printable non-null characters. Typically, it's just a few characters, one or more. Enclosure is utilized where you supply character or characters up to 4 to indicate whether or not with alphanumerics to enclose that alphanumerics with that particular character or characters. If it is a single quote, then you should include 4 single quotes to represent 1 single quote. Header. For the header, do you want a header record containing the field names in that delimited output? By default is no, but if you want it, you can say yes. Preserve space is if you don't use the enclosure attribute, whether or not you retain leading and trailing blanks in the alphanumeric data in between the delimiters, right, for that alphanumeric data. So by default, it's no, not to preserve that space, so you won't see it. But if you do want to preserve it, you say yes. But again, if you do preserve space, and then you include the enclosure attribute and an enclosure character, that will take precedence over the preserve space. And then a very cool option is that there's a record even delimiter. So maybe you have very strict requirements on how you create this delimited file. So it's not enough to have the delimiter that you set up in between the attribute, the values, but at the very end of the record, what do I require that delimiter to be? And that's what our delimiter is there. Very cool. Like, maybe if I needed a comma dollar sign, I could put that out, etc. So notice I don't have data set here as an attribute. Again, this is from the formal documentation, but you will see the data set attribute on hold, on table hold specifically. So now that I showed you a little bit with DFIX, so DFIX gives you control. So we have comma delimited output formats and tab delimited, but what if you need something that's beyond the scope of that? That's what DFIX is for, right? So let me showcase in Designer. Now, what I wanted to show you is that if I have a report, right, my output format, you can see I circled over there, I have CSV selected, right? So those are the outputs that I would see with a report type. And then over in the settings and format panel, on the format tab, select output settings. That's where you see the specifics related to the output format that you've selected. Since CSV is selected, you'll see where it gives you options for CSV with headers or without headers, or tab separated with or without headers. And basically CSV with headers is COM-T. CSV without headers is COM, format COM. Tab with headers is tab T, so format tab T. And then tab separated without headers is tab, so format tab, right? There is no option yet for delimited other than those options within Designer. So I'm going to kind of showcase and build my request in Designer and then adjust it to show you DFIX. It's something we know and we want to enhance, but I want to showcase again how you can leverage that data set attribute, but also how you can potentially use DFIX if you wanted to as well, and use maybe Designer as the starting point and then edit beyond that. So here's my example. If I ran that request, at the very bottom, you can see the output. It generated a file name, and here it says, Microsoft Excel comma separated values file. And then on the left side, you can see that file opened up in Excel and what it looks like. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what it looks like in opening it up in Notepad. And you can see the double quotes around the alphanumerics, right? Because that was on closure catalog. And this is comma delimited, excuse me. This is COM-T. You get double quotes around, and it's comma separated, right? Comma delimited. Okay. So now that I have that, I'm going to take that request that I just created in Designer, which has format COM-T, and I'm going to adjust it to use my DFIX. So I'm not getting there to the data set attribute yet, but I just wanted to showcase. So here's PC hold, format DFIX. I have a delimiter of a semicolon, enclosure of a double quote, and header no. Now, header no, I didn't even have to because that's the default anyway, but I coded it. You certainly can code the other attributes as well, but at a minimum, you must code the delimiter attribute. That's required. If I wanted to, I could even create comma using DFIX, right? You can create all different types of options and outputs using DFIX, but the other ones are just there and available for ease of use and for historical purposes. They were there before DFIX became enabled. Okay. So what happens when I take this and run this? what you'll see is I'll get saved as a bit file editor. You can see underneath it, there's the same source code I just showed you. And then you can see the editor.bib output in Notepad. And you can see that the alphanumerics are enclosed in double quotes. And you can see that the separator is indeed a semicolon between the values. Okay, that gave me my output, but it didn't really solve my question, right? That I want to actually create an output file and I want a specific extension on it. Okay. So one thing you might have thought was, well, if I didn't need PC hold, I could use hold, right? So I could do a file def here, and I'm doing basap /hdfile.csv. And then I change my on table PC hold. I made it a hold as HD file, matching up to my file def DD name, HD file. And I still have for my DFIX, delimiter, semicolon, enclosure, double quote, header, no. So really what I changed is I made PC hold. I added the as name for it. And that as name matches up to my file def. And there I said, there's my file def. And there is the file where I want to create it with the appropriate extension. And that actually does work, right? So you can see that the file did get created in BASAP with the .csv extension there. And you can see off to the right-hand side that it created my file. And I could see the double quotes around my alphanumerics and my semicolon delimiter. Looks great. But that wasn't the requirement. The requirement is I really needed this with PC hold. This is what the customer required. And they wanted the CSV extension. Okay. Even though that might not quite make sense. That was the requirement for their business. So what can I change? Well, what I did was I went back to what I originally had with PC hold for my DFIX delimiter, semicolon, enclosure, double quote, header, no. And now I said the keyword data set. And then I said I called it my dfile.csv. So I have my dfile.csv there. And I noticed I don't have any file def anymore in this request. This is back going to what I originally had. And now let's see what happens. And you can see that it said and it created the file, my dfile. And just to showcase again, that's the attribute I'm using on the command, dataset, my dfile.csv. And I didn't bother showing you what was in Excel because with the semicolon, it didn't display appropriately again, but that was the requirement for the customer. And CSV points to that application. Maybe they have it pointing somewhere else. But anyway, if I take that CSV file, which I did save, and I show it in Notepad, you can see that it's given me the output that I require in terms of the file, right? Double quotes around the alphanumerics. I have my semicolon delimiter, but the key piece here is that I use PC hold and I actually had the file extension that I want. Again, key thing that I would say with this is also, right, the extension that you pick needs to be actually in MIME types and have a redirection set, to some application, right? Otherwise, it's just going to the browser, right? And that's not the point. The point is to actually create the file, but you have to have something associated with that extension in terms of an application, right? So you have your MIME types set up for that extension to the appropriate application, and you would have save report, yes, for like redirection settings in the WebFOCUS administration console. Again, I think very cool option. And just something to be aware of that attribute is there and available. And certainly with whole files, you certainly can do that data set attribute. That's certainly available as well. Right? Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, no question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Walter. So.
Oh, wait. There's a comment.
Okay.
Please expose this in Designer GUI.
I know. That would be great. I agree completely. They are working on it. It's definitely, and the way they would do it would be most likely in that section. If maybe instead of saying CSV as a format output, it might say like delimited or something like that. And then you would have the CSV tabs and then selecting your own delimiter options as well. So they are looking into it. I can tell you that. It's definitely a great feature, DFIX, and we want to make it available, within Designer. But this is a way to leverage it in the interim, but also to give you some key things that maybe you weren't even aware of. Okay. For the last topic that I wanted to go over, and this is really a quick one, but extremely powerful, and this comes up quite often enough that I felt it was worth mentioning. And actually, it's such a cool and simple solution. Not a global solution, but certainly a solution. So the question being posed here, is it possible to suppress UTF-8 alphanumeric padding for specific whole file creation, right? So in standard WebFOCUS environments, right, character lengths and master files, right, are assumed to be character-based. So, however, when you're working with multi-byte character sets such as UTF-8, so let's say you have your code page set to 65001, a single character can occupy more than 1 byte of storage, right? 3, as an example, right? So instead of 1 byte, that character, it's 3 bytes of storage. And that can be a real problem. Now, again, your environment is UTF-8, and you know that, but there are some times when you just need that transaction file, that whole file to be created in WebFOCUS without that alphanumeric padding, right? Because of the environment. And is it possible to accomplish that? And it is. There's a feature that you probably are not aware of where you can do an AN, instead of an AN format, right? For fixed length alpha, you can do ANB to represent byte. Or for variable, instead of ANV, you can do ANVB. And in fact, I think the V and the B can be interchanged, but I like to keep it like consistent. So I say ANVB. So you can actually use those formats to reformat your alphanumeric fields for your request when you're creating that extract so that it's byte oriented instead of character based when you're in a UTF-8 environment as an example. And so all you can do is, like here, I'm showing you reformatting the field on the request, like country/A10B or country A10VB. Now, of course, another option could be just create the extract in WebFOCUS and then maybe have a utility at the operating system level that can handle byte remapping and coding and everything. And that's certainly possible and doable, but you can do this within WebFOCUS for a specific request. So here's an example. I just kind of did a slide showing you the AN, ANB, ANB, and the ANBB, like typical mappings. But remember, AN and ANB are character-based. ANB or ANVB are byte-based. Say that a few times fast. So let's take a look at an example. So here I have a very simple example with car. And I'm doing some sales and seats by country by car, and I'm holding it as base in base app as hold AN, and I'm doing it format alpha. Very basic request, right? And I'm running this within a UTF-8 code page 65001 environment in WebFOCUS. So what's my output? Well, I can see when I look at the hold AN FTM file that's created, England is much larger than the 10 bytes here. And in fact, if I look at the master file description created, I can see the LRECL of 87. Wait a minute, LRECL of 87. It says country is 10, car is 16, and sales and seats, because I use format alpha, right, are actual of 6 and 3, respectively. You see IO type is string, that's alphanumeric data. But the LRECL is 87. And the reason for that is I'm in a UTF-8 environment when I created this hold extract. And so the 10 bytes becomes 30. The 16 bytes becomes 48, right, by 3. You take that, that's 78, and add 9, and that's where you're getting your LRECL of 87. But really, the goal for this request, not for overall, but the goal for this request, not global, it's not a global solution, but certainly for this request, if I want to control it and I don't want that padding, I can achieve that with the ANB or ANVB formats, depending on whether or not you want fixed or variable length, right? So all I need to do is adjust my request. Here I'm reformatting the by fields. Might not be what you want to do. You can create defined fields and reference the defined fields instead. But I did the reformatting of the fields here. So you can see country/A10B, and then for car, A16B. And I'm holding this as an ANB file name, format alpha. And I did hold list print only because I'm going to have the implicit fields from the original fields and then the reformatted fields. And I only want the reformatted fields in the request and the extract. So I did hold list print only. When I run that, what do I see? I now see my hold ANB.ftm file. England is only 10 characters. I can see already car, right? So country is 10 characters. I can see already car next to it definitely is a lot smaller, looks like the 16 bytes. And if I actually look at the master file description, I can see the LRECL now is 35, which makes a lot more sense, right? 10 and 16 is 26 plus 9 gives me my LRECL of 35. And it achieved what I wanted simply by doing the reformatting of the fields, or again, by defined fields if I wanted to, or, where I'm saying A10B, A16B, using that B format for bytes to control that output. This has come up time and time again. Again, it's not a global solution, but many times that's not really necessary nor required for such an environment. The goal is for specific circumstances to meet specific business requirements. You really do need that, and you really don't want to have to go maybe necessarily outside WebFOCUS to be able to control it. Well, you can use the AND or ANDB format, the byte option, to control that. So that was my presentation. Any questions?
Renee, let me just give a warning with that.
Okay, sure.
As long as your physical data is using only characters in the single byte character set, you're okay.
Yes, that is true. Of course, that goes without saying. Absolutely. You're absolutely right.
Sometimes it has to be said.
No, but you're right. Obviously, if you have double byte character and you have that, that's not something you want to do. And that's why I said, really, this is not meant to be a global. This is really for specific sort of circumstances where it truly is a single byte character. You're not leveraging it for those characters in the data. Then this will accomplish what you're looking for, without having to go outside of WebFOCUS to manipulate the data. So good point, Walter. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. Any questions? All right. I'm not seeing any. All right. We're going to jump into the mainframe part. If you do leave, please remember to fill out the evaluations. And hopefully we'll see you at Summit. Very good presentation on another subject. Does the latest version of WebFOCUS Container Edition come with the data science AI server, or will that have to be installed after the container version? That I don't know. Well, put it on the evaluation and we can definitely have somebody get back to you on that. All right, again, we're going to jump into mainframe. If you're not a mainframe customer, or maybe you aren't, but you're just interested. But if you're not, feel free to drop. But again, please remember to fill out your evaluations. Remember, no Focus Friday in August. So Focus Friday, we'll see you again in September. These are good to see you. See you in September. All right. Let me get my screen ready. All right, they're dropping like flies. Okay, so for the mainframe session today, I decided to talk about Focus Studio. And basically, you have Focus Studio, you installed it, you've been running with Focus, and now you want to integrate the two. So that's what we're going to talk about. So in your normal Focus session, each of your users would have their own Focus library, their master library, possibly a Focus SQL if you're doing DB2, maybe an Access if you're doing other relational data sets or databases. So it's usually their user ID, high-level qualifier, and then focusexec.data, master.data, focusql.data, access.data. Okay, nothing too difficult there. When you're doing Focus Studio, though, everything's based on an app structure. So all your files are stored under an application. Well, they're not really stored. The app is a logical entity. So when you look and see the files, it comprises your masters, your procedures, your focus execs, and your access files, all looking like they're together, but physically they're separated behind the scenes. So behind the scenes, if we look at base app, under base app, we'll see a base app.focusexec.data. We'll see a base app.master.data. So knowing this, what can we do to then see our own personal or a user's own personal data sets in their Focus Studio environment? So let's see how Focus Studio does their mapping. So if you look at the edit as prof, you're going to see an entry that says app map MVS app. And even though this is on 5 different lines, it's technically all in one big long line. But it says mass. So anything that's considered a master, a .mass in the Windows world, is going to be the DD that's allocated to master. FIX is going to be the DD allocated to focusexec, and so on. So there's a lot of them. If you don't have a DD there, don't worry, it's not going to hurt anything. So knowing this, let's do the same technique and try to create an app for a particular user. Okay. So here I'm going to do dynamic allocate file PFEX, P for personal, and it's going to be my id.focusexec.data, reuse share, and then I have no alias. So the no alias you probably haven't seen before, but what it does on the server side, normally when you work with files on the server, the server will allocate them with a generic name, a different name than the actual data set, a different DD name. So I don't know if you ever looked on a PDS server on the mainframe, but you might see allocated to your server session a bunch of SYS data sets, SYS 0001, 0002. Those are actually just other names for the same data set in your dynamic. The no alias says don't do that. Don't put a DD name S or sys 000 number. This says I want you to actually have a PFEX. That way you know you don't have to worry about what the new name is when you're doing things within the server. So dynamic alloc PFEX, no alias, PMAS, and PAccess. Even though I'm doing FocusQL, FocusQL is basically just an access definition and should go to your PAccess. So now I'm doing an app map personal, which is going to be like we saw on the MVS app, fex equals / /dd : PFEX. Mass is going to equal / /dd underscore PMAS, etc. And then we create our path by saying app path personal IBI SAM. So the person who, so when I sign in with my CSS ID, I'm going to then see my personal app, and I'm going to see IBI SAM. Okay. You can take this one step further and parameterize it, so that way you can pull the person's user ID. So I'm using the token function to take from the FocSec user environment variable, take out this up to the slash, and just take the left part of that, which would be the user ID. Because normally your Amper Folk user will be the person who started the Focus server or the task that started the Focus server, where the FocSec user would be the one when you actually signed into the system. So here I get the username under P user, prepend it to focusexec.data, master.data, do the app map, and then add it to the path. Any questions on any of that? Okay, so far no. All right, so let's go live. See how bad I can mess this up. All right, so here I have a Focus Studio sign in, and I'm signed in under my CSS WXB ID, and this is my standard sign in. So I don't see my personal apps. I see a bunch of other ones. So what I could do then is go into my profile, maybe. Okay, refresh, let's go. Okay, go into my ID that I'm signed in on. Go under console and then go under edit my profile. So this is my personal profile under my user ID, or in this case, the CSS user ID. So I can come here now, take this code, I do the dynamic allocate for PFEX, PMAS, PAccess, just like we saw before. Instead of doing an app map, my app and IBI SAMP, I'm just going to prepend this new application to whatever was already there. So I'm going to save this. And then I'm going to close that. And now when I refresh my screen, I now see this application called my app, which is what we got here. And if I look in here, I should see what's in my focus.data. AAA, BB, and now I can just open it all over here, do my editing, which this to me is, it's a great benefit of Focus Studio, because if you're inside an interactive focus session on ISPF or in TSO, and if you don't remember what you called something that you just created, then you have to like get out of focus and go to 3.4, go through the list, sort by date, where here you can just pull it up in the list, sort by date modified, and get the last one that you're working on. Don't really have to remember the list. So now here's our master files. And if we go further down, we should see our synonyms, our masters. So these are also old. All right. So let's change my profile. And we're going to do the parameterizing. So I'm going to take anybody who comes in, we'll get their user ID, allocate their files, and then go ahead and show it as an app. If you're going to do something like this, I would beef up the code a little more just to do some checking to make sure that if you allocate or before you allocate a person's bookexec.data, you might want to validate and check that that data set already exists before you do that. So I put some error checking in here, but I know that these 3 files already exist. So let's save this. In this case, I should see a new app with my user ID. So let's refresh. And there's my user ID. And then I see, click on it. I should see the same apps that we saw before, or the same entries. if you have all of your, let's say you have an application for a department, and the high level qualifier is something dot, and then the department name, and then dot focus at that data, and then master dot data. Then you could create your own department application doing the same technique. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. Any questions on that? All I hear is crickets. All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. That's all I have. Again, hopefully we'll see you or some of you in August at Summit. If not, hopefully we'll see you again in September. Thanks everyone for coming, and everybody be well.
Thank you, everyone.